On August 9, 2020, another presidential election will take place in Belarus. However, current internal events in Belarus suggest that this time Lukashenko's regime is feeling the wind of change much more than in all previous rigged elections. External diversion, last-minute candidate, thousands of people on the streets. Belarusian events now resemble the script of a good thriller film. Let's take a look at them. Welcome to the 20th Report. Belarusian officials reported that a group of Russian citizens came to one of Minsk hotels on July 24th. After a few days, they moved to one of the resorts in the Minsk region and have been there identified as outside saboteurs. Paradoxically, they attracted attention as they had not committed any acts typical of such places, including alcohol abuse. At the National Security Council convened on July 29th and the briefing of Andrei Rauko, the Secretary of Defense of Belarus, which took place the following day, it was announced that the authorities knew about the arrival of more than 200 fighters from the so-called Wagner Group sent to destabilize the country during the upcoming presidential elections. However, only 33 people were detained, which means that nearly 170 saboteurs remain in the country. The detainees include snipers, IT specialists and experts in the field of explosives. It is speculated that two more groups are waiting at the Russian-Belarusian border, one near Pskov, the other near Nevel. Moreover, Rauko did not rule out blocking the internet for reasons of national security. The Wagner PMC, private military company, is a Russian proxy organization that serves to expand the Kremlin's geopolitical and geoeconomic influence in various regions of the world. Officially, it belongs to private hands, but it is under direct Kremlin commands. Minsk versus Moscow. Strikingly and unheard of in Minsk-Moscow relations, Lukashenko has blamed the Kremlin with hostile intentions towards Belarus. Such public statements can be read as a deliberate escalation of the conflict, complicating potential behind-the-scenes arrangements. This is an unprecedented deterioration in relations between Belarus and Russia. Lukashenko is trying to soften the tone of the accusation a bit, saying, if they are guilty, we must get out of this situation with dignity. If innocent, well, we have no reason to discredit the country that is close to us. However, further cooling of the relationship is inevitable, and further escalation, including a complete breakdown, cannot be ruled out. Moscow seems surprised by the way things turned out and refuted the allegations. Russian officials, including the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Kremlin spokesman Peskov, do not deny that their citizens were in Belarus but claim that they did not break the law. Vladimir Putin convened the Security Council for the occasion, which was followed by a message that Russia expected the immediate release of the detainees. The Russian ambassador to Minsk, Dmitry Mezentsev, argued that the arrested Russians were employed in a security company and were on a business trip to another country while they were only passing through Minsk. Interestingly, Ukraine also referred to the case, asking Minsk for the extradition of 28 detainees as suspected of acting on the side of the separatist People's Republics. However, both versions presented by Minsk and Moscow raised some suspicions. Andrei Porotnikov from Belarus security blog even suggests that the Wagner PMC has been trapped by Minsk. There are several indications for this. First of all, it is hard to say that the Russian proxy group was hiding in Minsk. It was seen in the military clothes throughout the stay. In the post-arrest decisions, the Belarusian authorities seem very prepared, if not relaxed. Although the category of the event directly corresponds to a threat to national security, the authorities have not decided to close the borders with Russia. Belarusian troops did not move eastward to respond to the presence of the other subversive groups. This was done later. Moreover, Minsk has not applied for any international aid for diplomatic assistance. The author of Belarus security blog hypothesizes that Belarus was well aware of the presence of the Wagner group. Moreover, Minsk was constantly providing transport services to the Wagner PMC, for example to Syria. In such a scenario, if both sides are aware of it but cannot announce it publicly, it may be considered as Minsk's aggressive act towards Moscow, and a direct message from the Belarusian authorities that they are ready to escalate political relations. The potential goal of Lukashenko's courageous political game may be to undermine the Kremlin's credibility. For many years, Moscow has been trying to gain international recognition of the status of the Donbas People's Republics. The scandal with the Wagner proxy, stating that most of them were active in a diversion in eastern Ukraine and accusing them of the coup attempt in Belarus, greatly depreciates the credibility of the Russian narrative. Moreover, it could be a move ahead of the potential actions of Moscow, which may at some point question the territorial integrity of Belarus, as it was the case in Ukraine. Thus, Lukashenko draws attention to the international opinion that Russia is introducing a new version of Green Man, this time to Belarus. Exit strategies. Breaking ties with a country on which your economy fully depends is not wise, so let's think about alternative scenarios for Belarus. Although the Chinese influence by the Neman River continues to grow, it is estimated that the Chinese have already invested up to 20 billion in Belarus. Still, due to the geographical gap, it is hard to believe that the Belarusian authorities are fully betting on Beijing. On the other hand, relations with the West, especially with the USA and Poland, have been recently warming up again. Washington has already announced the reappointment of its ambassador in Minsk, and Lukashenko is announcing the end of the cooling-off period. After years of following the EU agenda of limiting relations with Belarus due to its undemocratic system, Poland is also beginning to feel the need to influence the eastern direction. No wonder, because Belarus is, next to Ukraine, a key geostrategic country for Poland, as I mentioned in the episode on Polish geopolitics. So far, Warsaw activities are mainly soft power, for example sending a convoy with medical materials to Belarus during the early stage of the coronavirus pandemic. However, the next step could be the announcement of a new diplomatic body, the Lublin Triangle, which may potentially play a significant role in the region in the future. It is a recently established cooperation platform between Poland, Lithuania and Ukraine. The format differs from the Free Seas Initiative or platforms inside the EU and NATO by that it also covers Ukraine. But Warsaw, Kiev and Vilnius seem to be aware of the importance of Minsk, as the Belarusian Ministry of Foreign Affairs also received an invitation to the first meeting of the Lublin Triangle. For now in the role of guest of honor, but perhaps along with the warming relations with the West and further deterioration of relations with Moscow, Minsk could add another tip to the platform. Nonetheless, greater integration with the widely understood West is a distant prospect at the moment. It will take a lot of time to restore lost years. The Contender. We cannot forget about the background of all these events. Everything happens just a moment before the elections scheduled for August 9. About their undemocratic nature, as well as for more information on the recent history of Lukashenko's rule, please check out the previous report on Belarus. It is no different this time. The Belarusian government apparatus has undertaken a series of measures aimed at preventing domestic and foreign observers from watching the elections. Foreign journalists are denied accreditation. Two main opposition candidates, Viktor Babaryka and Sergei Tikhanovsky, were arrested under Vogue charges. Babaryka was accused of financial embezzlement in Bielgazprom Bank, which he had been managing for 20 years. The reason for Tikhanovsky's arrest is even more bizarre. He was accused of disturbing the public order during a rally at which he was collecting signatures for the candidacy. Therefore, it may seem that everything is going a similar path during the current elections. However, there are many signs that it may now be different. Belarusian society seems to be tired of Lukashenko's 26-year rule. Although official propaganda polls forecast Lukashenko's support of 60-70%, actually it's hitting bottom. When it was possible to conduct election polls on the Belarusian internet before censorship blocked them, support for Lukashenko did not exceed 5%. On this basis, the Sasha 3% movement emerged, which according to many reflects the real level of support. After Tikhanovsky was arrested, his wife Svetlana decided to run for the presidency. Surprisingly, the Electoral Commission allowed her to run for the election, and the staffs of other suppressed opposition candidates gave her support. Tikhanovska immediately gathered crowds on the streets, and her rallies gathered thousands of people. 10,000 in Grodno, 18,000 in Brest, and 63,000 people in Minsk alone. These are unprecedented social movements for Belarus. In the Voice platform, which is targeted at independent counting of votes in the upcoming elections, 750,000 people have already registered on. Still, the opposition cannot be considered unequivocally pro-Western or anti-Russian. Everyone is aware of the very deep degree of dependence on Moscow and its geographical proximity, which is why the common agenda is to create a neutral state cooperating with both the East and the West. One of the successes of the campaign is that people are not forced to choose between Moscow, Warsaw or Brussels. However, it should also be noted that the unofficial anthem of Tikhanovska's rallies is Jacek Kaczmarski's Waltz, based on the Catalan melody of La Staka, translated into Belarusian and Russian. The same song accompanied Poles in the overthrow of communism in the 1980s. Such serious social movements in favor of change create the last reason that the case of the Wagner Group is a Lukashenko conspiracy. Independent Belarusian experts agree that this will allow the government to tighten the pre-election suppression even more. In addition, the propaganda apparatus in all the confusion is trying to create Aleksandr as the savior of the nation who discovered and stopped the external threat to Minsk. Yet the Belarusian society does not seem to believe in the Wagner PMC story. Sasha's Twilight? To this complicated puzzle, we need to add President Lukashenko's poor health condition. The media speculates about complications from diabetes and the COVID-19 virus. It was noted that Lukashenko came to the Security Council meeting with a bandaged arm. Only a few of the most trusted people have now access to him. Lukashenko is now in a political ambush. Every step he undertakes now, such as election cancellation, Tikhanovska's withdrawal, repressions or provocations, will harm his image and position. He feels that he has lost even his pro-Russian electorate, which was a political airbag for him. There are many indications that he is now playing his own game, that outcome of which is unknown. Mixed signals are also coming from the Kremlin, which may even have decided to end support for Lukashenko. Tikhanovska's victory in the elections would, however, be a huge surprise, as the candidate herself admits that she expects the elections to be rigged again. At the same time, she says that the real fight will start after the elections and the real choice will be decided on the streets of Belarus. But one thing is certain: Lukashenko will not cede without a fight. Is it Lukashenko's last dance? I think we'll find out in the next weeks or months. But for now, please let me know what do you think about the situation in Belarus. Please also like and subscribe the material to help the channel grow, and I'll see you next time.